Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on the CuppaChino Club social TV channel. We're so glad to have you with us again today. Welcome, Bridgetti. Thank you so much for being here and producing this amazing show. We've got a great guest list lineup of guests today, don't we?
Yes, absolutely. So if you're watching the show, are you a business owner right now? Are you concerned about how to deal with your staff during COVID-19? Has opening up filled you with a measure of anxiety? If that is you right now, then we've got your back today. Don't go away. We'll be right back with answers to your labor questions. If you're just joining us, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Bridgetti and Banda. Today is day 54 of the lockdown. And if you're a business owner right now and you are anxious about opening up safely and how to deal with your labor issues, you're in the right place. We've got you covered on the CuppaChino Club social TV channel today. And my co-host, Viola, is also an accomplished senior executive and the owner of 2 entrepreneurial ventures, so she knows firsthand what it is like. So Viola, I think today we've got a really great lineup.
I am really excited to introduce the ladies to everyone experienced in their field, eloquent, competent, amazing ladies doing what they need to do to just assist small businesses. And so we're excited to chat to them today.
Absolutely. So we've got 3 attorneys from Guy and Associates. Britney Theron, she's an admitted attorney specializing in labor law. Lisa Wood, she is a labor relations specialist. And then also Stacy Moreland, she's an employment lawyer. And so let's invite them onto the show because we've got some questions for them, and I'm sure you, the viewers, bring your questions as well. If you're watching the show live, if you're catching the show on the replay, post your questions in the comment. But let's not waste any time. I'm very excited to introduce to you the attorneys from Guy and Associates.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are always, Lisa's like becoming one of our absolute favorite guests, and there's always been requests for Lisa to be on the show. But thank you so much, Lisa, for recruiting. Today you did a bit of recruitment. It's about
2 of my favorite people.
We'll have to work on the retention and keeping them as guests on our show for like the next few weeks. So thank you very much, ladies, for joining us today. There's so much to discuss. But what I do want to ask you is, I will ask you to just briefly introduce yourselves in terms of your years of experience and what it is and how long you've been working with Guy and Associates. Just very brief introductions. Lisa, we'll start with you.
So I was, I think, hired in 2015, and then I started my articles in 2016 with Guy and Associates, and I was admitted in 2018, beginning of 2018, and been a practicing attorney ever since.
Perfect. Stacy?
Hi there. So I actually started off on a completely different path. I wanted to be a journalist back in the day. And then I had the opportunity to study law, absolutely loved labor law. And yeah, after graduating, got the opportunity to do my articles under Brendan, who's our director. and I've loved it and stayed with him ever since. And yeah, fortunate to work with Lisa and Britney.
Right, that's brilliant. Britney?
Yeah, and so I was actually recruited by one of Brendan Guy's associates, Paul Cooley, and I used to work under him as an HR practitioner way back when. And then they had a vacancy open as a candidate attorney, and I was employed, I think, around the middle of 2016, and have been with Guy and Associates since then.
Well done. Well, the HR department at Guy and Associates must be doing really well. You know what they're doing. Okay. So if you don't mind, we're going to get into the discussion immediately. Lisa, I'm going to ask you this question because we've sort of been checking in with you. So before lockdown started, we had a discussion with you. Before we started the sort of second phase of lockdown, we had a discussion with you. And one of the questions that we've been asking is sort of what's changing? What is the main area of concern that businesses have? We've now on day 54. Day 54 of lockdown, we've had quite a lot happening. We've moved to level 4. Businesses have opened. Has there been any major change or shift in focus and attention in terms of your area of work?
Yeah, so I think for me, the biggest thing that I've been advising clients on is health and safety related issues. And this, I think the biggest change has been, these are professional officers that have never had to identify a risk before in their lives. And suddenly they're talking all these terms from the Occupational Health and Safety Act that they've never had to deal with. They're doing risk assessments. They're putting in place PPE, which is the protective equipment to control the risks and mitigate the risks and exposure to the virus specifically. So I think that's probably been a major shift for companies that have just never had to deal with this before.
Absolutely. I mean, even in our discussions, we're finding a lot of businesses who never before thought about, legislative requirements. They're now starting to have to read acts. They're starting to look at the Health and Safety Acts with absolute vigor. They're starting to talk about liability insurance. Businesses never spoke about those things before. So I do think that there's been a major shift. And so the little saying, it's not business as usual, I think that's really becoming hard, cold fact to some of our businesses. Have there been any major legislative changes that are currently in place or are being proposed that will influence business? Britney, do you know if there's been any kind of major legislative change?
Well, in terms of the legislation, I mean, I'm sure that it's probably common knowledge that when it comes to legislation, that's a very slow process when it comes to change. How, legislation or the enforcement, how it's really regulated is via regulations that come out. So in this case, we've seen the regulations come out in respect of the national lockdown, in terms of the National Management Act, for example. So instead of the act itself changing, there's been various regulations that have come out prohibiting our movements now. There's been various regulations that have come out in respect of health and safety, in respect of the various funding opportunities available to employers and businesses. So from a national legislative perspective, hasn't really been too much development, but from a regulatory perspective in terms of regulations, we've seen quite a bit coming out. I mean, Lisa hit it on the nail in terms of health and safety. I've mentioned it in terms of the relief schemes. So those are really the changes that we've seen. I'm not sure if any of the other ladies had any in mind that they wanted to mention specifically.
Okay. Stacy or Lisa, do you have any in mind, or even proposed changes, things that you suspect will actually come before the legislator? Is there anything in the pipeline that's sort of starting, bubble over that you'd like our viewers to know about? Lisa, anything from your side? Or let's start with Stacy. Stacy.
Sure, thanks. So yeah, I think at this point in time, I mean, I just have to agree with what Britney's saying, which is that the government is not pushing for let's look too long term at the moment, even though many of us on social media, we're seeing those conversations happening about how this is going to looking in 6 months' time or a year's time. What different kind of a world are we going to be living in? At the moment, we're talking about dealing with, not to be negative, but it's a crisis for many people. And we're talking about in a day and in a week. And that is why government is focusing on little regulations that are being brought in within the framework of existing legislation, because those are the quick movements that we can make now.
Okay. Do you want to give us a few examples, Stacey, of maybe some of those small changes that are being made?
Absolutely. So, I mean, and maybe you already touched on this with Lisa in your previous conversation, but immediately, even previously under what was, what we now know as level 5 or the hard lockdown that we previously had, they immediately SARS made little changes in terms of, for instance, okay, you're in employment, you have a crisis. Now you can delay payment of PAYE. You can delay your company's tax. You can talk about getting rebates. You can talk about delaying payments.
Okay.
And in terms of existing UIF benefits, I mean, a lot of the way this was marketed to the public, which is completely fine, is these are new benefits. And yes, they are. But really what they've done is they've taken existing avenues and existing routes and kind of diverted the schemes and mechanisms and money and made it more accessible and regrouped and refiltered and made it, available in new ways.
Okay, so those are the things that we sort of been keeping our fingers, we've been keeping our fingers on the pulse in terms of that. But just a question relating to this question. So when clients are speaking to you, are there major changes that are taking place with, for example, within employment contracts? Like one of the things that we've been talking about quite a lot is like the cost of data, for example. Are concessions being made for that? What about your own device, and software that has to be stuck onto your own device, and the security and safety software, who's paying for that? Those kinds of things. And if you get are you seeing a lot of sort of changes to that employment contract, to the sort of standard employment contract that you can buy? Before at like CNA, now things are changing so radically. Lisa, do you want to answer that question first?
Yeah, so sort of similar to the whole relationship that legislation has with regulations, what you have in a workplace is you'll have your employment contract, which is usually just the stuff that needs to be in that contract, and then the workplace is regulated with policy. So something that I've been assisting employers with is drafting policies that are a little bit more strict in terms of protecting your equipment that is now at your home, and you now don't potentially have house insurance and those types of things. So I've been assisting with that respect, and employees don't necessarily have to agree to a policy. That's just something that the employer can implement of their own accord to regulate the workplace. So it's kind of a similar relationship where you can still implement change without actually getting an employee's consent to change their terms and conditions of employment.
Okay, great. Britney, in terms of your experience working with your clients, is there anything else that's sort of coming up that's rearing its head?
Yeah, well, I think it's a very good point that you make, because the reality is that a lot of employees may have suffered in respect of costs increasing during this time. So irrespective of them potentially having a reduction in salary or not earning their full salary, the other consideration is, well, now I've got to pay or invest in a more expensive internet connection to be able to manage the Zoom calls and the conference calls. And whilst we haven't really seen this come to fruition as yet, what I will say from a legal standpoint is that effectively you can't be asking your employee to effectively be getting less out of their employment at the end of the day. So if my costs associated with my employment have increased, there should be a little bit of a give and a take from the employer's perspective to say, look, we're paying you the same salary, but effectively you're getting less out, which in effect has changed some of your terms and conditions. So it's something that employers should definitely be aware of. We haven't seen, maybe more pertinent to your question, we haven't seen anything come out as sort of a hard regulatory direction that employers must necessarily fund increased expenses for employees as a result of COVID accommodation. But it's something that employers and businesses should be aware of, because in effect the employee is sitting in a worse position, and that's definitely what the law tries to ward against happening. Especially from a unilateral perspective and not as a consultative discussion.
Yeah. Look, a lot of the challenges that employees are facing are actually unintended consequences of this lockdown. I don't think we could have anticipated even 10% of the challenges that employees are going to face with this lockdown. So it's really just been, I think, a steep learning curve for a lot of employers. But I take that point, Lisa, that, it's really about, let's then start looking at policy and really start looking at how our new normal is shaped. And then if things do have to be added to contracts moving forward, you could rather have that negotiation then. But, the president spoke to us on the last occasion he spoke to us. He actually spoke about this economic plan, this growth plan, and this plan that they had to start boosting the economy, because everybody's concerned about the state of the economy. Everybody's concerned about, the whole idea around joblessness and so on. Do you guys have any idea what might be part of that from where you sit? What might be part of that plan that's to be announced soon?
Yeah,
Lisa, go ahead, Lisa.
Okay. No, I was just going to say that I don't think anyone has a clear idea of what that's going to contain. But I mean, just from my perspective, I know that this recession has been compared to the 2008-2009 crisis, and it's said to be that it's going to be fairly similar. So I'm guessing we can take guidance from what happened there. And I mean, I was discussing this with Britney and Stacy earlier, and it's a terrible phrase, but the biggest thing you can do is make debt affordable. And if debt is affordable, then people are able to temporarily fund cash flow shortages and pay employees, pay their overheads, pay their rent, and then they can make it through this and eventually just pay that off at a later stage. And I know the other thing that is in the pipeline is injecting funds into short-term projects, government projects, so that at least has sort of short bursts of increased employment. And then, that will eventually come to an end, but hopefully the economy has picked up at that stage.
Yeah. Just a very quick question relating to that one. If there was anything you would like to see in this economic plan, Stacey, what would that be from your perspective and from your industry's perspective? What would you guys like to see part of that plan if you had this magic wand and you had a direct line to the president? What would it be? Maybe you do have a direct line to the president. Yeah, I'm making assumptions.
Goodness, you'd have to give me a couple of days to think about what I would want to say on that one. Yeah. I think at this point in time, what I'm seeing, there have been fantastic initiatives that have been introduced in terms of targeted relief through government departments. So if you're in the tourism industry, if you're in arts, if you're in sport, if you are harmed in particular ways because of this crisis, we've heard the news, money is being made available, things are accessible the same way other employers have access to UIF, TERS and all of that. I think the change that I would like to see, and this is perhaps it's a change that comes from those in charge, but also those on the receiving end of these benefits, is communication and access to information. Because so often these application processes are not understandable to the average person, and people lose hope when they come up against what they perceive to be a brick wall. I know recently with UIF TERS, there was a lot of media attention around the fact that foreign workers were not being paid. And the reality is that the fund is incredibly burdened, and what the issue was actually that their system wasn't accommodating these applications, and they needed to do by hand processing of these applications. Now you can imagine how burdensome that is. Yeah. And then what we see is an enormous amount of negativity on social media in the public, because they perceive this as government is not here for us, there's prejudice, there's inefficiency, and it becomes very damaging, I think, for morale on an individual, community, national level. So the change I'd like to see is perhaps to be able to have better communication from these various institutions around the difficulties that they're facing, and being able to adapt technology to make these application processes more streamlined.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It was a great, I'm sorry I put you on the spot, but it was one of those world peace answers.
Yes. I would love that too.
Yeah. So, just to pick up on the conversation that you had now, how have businesses actually responded to the assistance government is offering? Are all these funds being burdened? Are they all oversubscribed? How are businesses responding? How are they perceiving the availability of funds? Are they finding the processes onerous? Are they finding them easy? Britney, could you answer that first, please?
So I think just to pick up on what Stacy said, she's probably hit it on the nail. We've been inundated with businesses asking for assistance for the various relief options. So that's great. Businesses are definitely trying to capitalize on the assistance that's available to them. But as a result of the lack of information and the sort of, the overwhelming tension that results in not knowing how to progress in the application process, and when you hit obstacles, how to, you're not sure what to do, there's sort of no one really to contact. I would say that businesses have responded well, but the reality is that as a lack of the information and a lack of the kind of well-thought processes that we would have hoped to have seen, businesses have sort of lost a little bit of trust. So, in the process, in the government, in the relief schemes, which is sad, because we may see a bit of a downturn in those same businesses, applying again. So, at the moment we get questions like, should I apply for TERS in May? The temporary employee relief scheme. Is it worth it? And we're saying to clients, yes, absolutely. Why wouldn't you? But that's where we've seen the breakdown in trust from a national level and in the relief schemes. And it's a sad reality, but we want to encourage businesses to keep pushing on with trying. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, look, it's not easy. And a lot of businesses sort of play under the radar for lots of reasons. They just cash flow is a problem. So, paying everything that you need to pay, clients mess you around, suppliers mess you around. So a lot of our businesses are not in that formal space with these neat little, dossiers with their UIF payments up to date and PAYE up to date. And so when government are saying, give me a copy of your audited financial statements for the last 5 years, businesses are saying, not going to get involved. But the trust issue is a very big issue, Britney. I think it's a very important point that you make, that, everything we've got Team South Africa, we're all sort of excited about, getting to the finish line, working together. And as soon as these issues of mistrust come into play, it becomes very difficult to take Team South Africa forward. Even the sort of comments around, all three spheres of government working together really nicely. I think this whole idea of certain provinces not being able to go on to level 3 is going to create a political with a capital P problem. But, so one of the social partners that we don't really always include in these discussions is Labour. But how have you guys, you work with Labour federations and with Labour unions, and with the leadership of Labour. How have Labour been influencing businesses' response to the lockdown? Have they been influencing it? How are they influencing the work that you guys are doing, and how business is just coping? Stacy, have you had an experience with them recently?
Yes, I have, and it's perhaps a bit of an uninteresting answer, but actually, the relationship that pre-existed lockdown and pre-existed this completely exceptional situation, those relationships continue. If you had an antagonistic relationship with your union, you're going to see pushback on, why are we doing short term? Why are we laying off? What are you doing about occupational health and safety? And it's in this immediate escalation to dispute level. As opposed to, if you had those good relationships beforehand, people are now taking a collaborative approach. I would love to say, in the vein of my previous world peace answer, that we could all take this moment to revolutionize those relationships. Even I am not that optimistic. The reality is, if everyone is stressed, and unfortunately, you're going to continue to see those antagonistic relationships if that is what you had before.
Yeah.
I don't know what more I can offer you in terms of how to change that situation.
No, it makes perfect sense. Lisa, what's your experience been like in terms of your clients?
Yeah, we have had a specific situation where the union took quite a strong opposition to the breathalyzing that was happening. So this is a client who would breathalyze every single person, including us, when we visit that premises. If you enter the premises, you are breathalyzed. But that obviously creates quite a problem for the security officer who's on the receiving end of someone constantly blowing air towards them, as well as a single unit of equipment, which is being used by 100 employees coming in for a single shift. So, they had to just realize that, you kind of have to give in here, that there is a risk and there are ways to adapt and do things differently. But, if the union is going to be putting up a fight on something that should be a reasonable requirement, if it's also reasonable that it's creating a risk in the workplace, then, the client maybe a little bit reluctantly at first, but then, came around and realized that you can do things in a different way. And in that case, we suggested an observation checklist as opposed to people constantly blowing out of their mouth.
Yeah, so it's really just I think everybody working together and still looking for that opportunity to collaborate with all the social partners, I guess, is really going to try and be that solution. But I think Stacey's point is quite interesting in that, even though there's a crisis, the relationship, so the nature of the relationship continues. Again, one of those crystal ball questions. Everybody's talking about level 3. Level 3 is going to happen. So level 4, I think, had everybody quite anxious, and lots of businesses sort of opened up and then closed down again, and then realized that there had to be a major cash investment in terms of getting PPE, sanitizing, deep cleaning, etc., training staff, briefing staff. Quite a process. And so I know that there were quite a few businesses that sort of, opened and then closed and reconvened and then opened again. And those kinds of things have been happening. I know that there's certain, well documented by media is sort of the supermarkets that have closed down because cases have been found, lots of big companies like I&J, etc. What are you expecting to be part of level 3 in terms of what are some of the challenges that will happen with level 3 when it comes to sort of the labor relations, industrial relations space? Britney, what do you think that would be?
So I think we're probably going to see a lot more of what we're already seeing, which is the staggered reintegration of the employment or the labor force into the market. As you mentioned, employers, they had this dramatic opening, and now we're probably going to see a more cautioned staggered approach to when they reopen operations. What definitely we will see in terms of level 3 and from an employment perspective is the emphasis on health and safety, specifically workplace plans that have come into play, which are a requirement per the regulations. So that's something that every business, every employer should have in place when it comes to sort of level 3, if not already. So there's going to be a lot more emphasis on how you regulate your workplace, which wasn't there in the past. If you were a smaller business owner and you had minimal employees, you could probably get away with not doing risk assessments and things like that. Whereas pursuant to the regulations, you're going to have to definitely have that intact.
Okay, Stacey, anything in your crystal ball that you see for level 3?
Yeah, I think the reality that infection numbers are going to increase. And I think I would just like to, if I may, kind of comment a little bit further on what Britney was saying. So say, for instance, you have a business of 300 employees. And you've done everything that you need to do. You're implementing the workplace plan. You're implementing occupational health and safety requirements. I think it's very important that employers need to see and really accept the transmissibility issue of COVID-19 and factor in the fact that we're not just talking about legal compliance here and box ticking. We're not just talking about taking those occupational health and safety regulations and going, yes, 2 face masks and some sanitizer and we're done. Because at the end of the day, what's really going to cost your business is one person out of those 300 causes the whole factory to shut down for a month or whatever the case may be. If that happens to you twice in the next 6 months, I mean, it's going to be a disaster. So go above and beyond. I know it's expensive. I know it's frustrating, but do what you can to try and introduce screening, sanitary measures, physical distancing measures, contact tracing, all of those things that you're required to do. Apply your mind, go over and above, because the risk of infection and the infection rate is going to increase.
Absolutely. I think that is such both of you making such valid points. Lisa, anything you want to say to add to that?
Just I think we're going to see a lot of people sort of long-term developing a policy of people working from home, and that's one of the easiest ways that you can make things a little bit safer is if people are not constantly in contact with one another. But also just to bear in mind that I know a lot of people are just sort of doing that as a default. Okay, just work from home and that's safe. I don't need to think about this any further. But at the end of last year, there were health and safety regulations released about ergonomic risk. So it's something that employers are going to have to look at. If you're looking at long-term people working from home, they're going to have to be set up with workstations at home that actually, have a comfortable chair, a desk to work from. And the risk assessment doesn't just stop at do you have, a sore throat. It's actually, there are other things to take into account. If you were just at home for a couple of weeks, I can appreciate that you're not going to look at getting someone a new chair to have at home. But if you're looking at the rest of the year, these are things you're going to have to think about.
Absolutely. I think it's so important. That was, thank you ladies for being on the show today. Amazing content. You guys are just, I like hanging out with clever people, hey? I just absolutely love it. So thanks for sharing your knowledge with us and all the information that you did, because it was really, really important. And I know that the ladies from the CuppaChino Club, and anybody else watching the show are really going to appreciate your insights. So thank you so much for being with us. It's time for us to say goodbye. Thank you to all our viewers. Thank you for all the questions that came through. And if you're catching it on the replay, please feel free to still, add some more comments and add some more questions in the comment section. And we'll definitely forward those comments to our guests if there is anything that they specifically could answer. Bridgetti, wow, what a show.
It's been absolutely, absolutely amazing. I think, tremendous value. So if you've been watching the show today, and you're catching it on the replay, please share this because it's invaluable information for anyone that's in business moving forward. We've got some challenges. And I think the one thing that came out of the conversation for me is that nothing is black and white at this time. There's a lot of gray areas. There's a lot of room for being human in business. I think, don't, it's not the time to look for legal loopholes not to do anything. Because if anything, we need to embrace one another on an emotional level if we're going to move forward. We all need each other. It's not about,
Absolutely.
I think if we're looking for legal loopholes to do things or not do things, you're barking up the wrong tree is the sense that I'm getting from here.
Yeah.
So
Great
thank
show.
you for watching us, everyone.
Thank you,
join
everybody.
do join us every day of the week for more on how you as a business can cope and pivot with COVID-19. We go live every Tuesday at 9 a.m. and other days we go live, it's 9 a.m. Eastern and 3 p.m. on GMT +2. And for the rest of the week, we go live at 1 p.m. Eastern and 7 p.m. on GMT +2. And tomorrow, we are immensely privileged to have Rob Balasalbis from TubeBuddy on the show. Rob's going to show us how we can use social media more effectively at a time of business unusual and how that can help you to pivot forward. So thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you back again tomorrow.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.